In League of Legends, it's no secret that the role with the fewest champions to play from is the Marksman role. After all, it's challenging to create unique champions for a role that's mainly featured around the most basic ability in the game, the basic attack. One of the earliest champions designed as a Marksman in League has been a mainstay in the meta for the better part of a decade now, but recently something has changed. Ashe is one of those champions that everyone knows and has played, but doesn't really care to play her because she can tend to be kind of dry. Perhaps it's better to remember that because her design is quite old, she's not especially flashy in any way like these other newer champions are. Ashe has been pretty much frozen in time with minimal changes to her kit in spite of a small rework a few years back. Many would suggest that Ashe has lost her favorability in the Marksman meta because she's just outclassed by champions that can provide so much more for their team than her. But in reality, Ashe offers a little bit too much for her team in the Marksman role that she probably can't make the use of the basic attack as well as other Marksmans can. But in reality, Ashe offers so much for her team that the ADC role is probably not the best use for her kit anymore. Instead, she's meant to be a lot more useful. Recently, Ashe has been picked up as a support champion, and not just any support, but one with such an overloaded set of tools in that role, which can make it extremely frustrating to play against. Here's a quick rundown of the video structure. First, we'll review Ashe's champion identity and why it's better in the support role. Then we'll do a quick rundown of her abilities in this sense, the rune and build options, lane matchups, marksman pairings, and helpful tips for each stage of the game. So before continuing the video, if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe for more content like this. Ashe's in-game design is a beautiful combination of exactly what you'd expect the support champion to bring to the table. Strong laning, great vision control in multiple ways, and excellent CC and teamfight presence. She's akin to more so a poke mage with long auto attack range, excellent harass tools, and kill presence at 6 and beyond. Functionally, she's sort of a hybrid between Lux and Senna, but just lacks sustain. You want to still embrace the mindset that you are a backliner, but your teamfight style is still very focused on utility, starting fights, and securing space for your team to position optimally. When played correctly, Ashe is easily one of the most obnoxious off-meta supports to play against for her insane ability haste and utility-focused abilities. Especially with her ultimate being such a high-impact ability with a really low cooldown, it can be very impressive to play against with given full reign. Let's quickly review her abilities in relation to her new playstyle. So Ashe's passive is a very underrated part of her kit, where her basic attacks slow enemies. When you consider that feature with her attack range being 600, it's easy to see how she can even initiate a gank on a melee enemy with a simple attack. In the right situation, this can actually create a ton of kill threat for certain Ashe matchups as well, as you can simply run down enemies. Keep in mind though that you are still a backliner, so if you do find yourself in situations where autoing the enemy feels dangerous, by no means do you have to commit and expose yourself to that danger. In terms of Ashe support, her Q being Ranger's Focus is probably her least useful spell, as it only allows her to deal more damage after being in combat for a few seconds and getting off 4 auto attacks. It is certainly helpful to have that extra bit of damage and to use the ability as a basic auto reset, but it's not her bread and butter ability with this sort of style, since she's not building any damage to really synergize with this. Volley, on the other hand, is the ability that will potentially cause your opponent to quit in the laning phase. Ashe fires a cone of arrows that deal damage and apply the same passive slow. Even without purchasing a D, the raw base damage and cooldown of this ability in the early game can make it extremely oppressive for enemies in almost every matchup. The AoE is massive, which creates situations of consistent and uncounterable harass, and in the right matchup can allow her AD carry to play extremely aggressively. In later phases of the game, this ability is your engine for the support item you get, typically Imperial Mandate for increased damage, or even some things like Moonstone. Hawkshot's been a tool that's traditionally tossed into her kit just to give her additional vision tools as an AD carry, but surprise surprise, this ability remains the exact same when she functions as a support as well. With that being said, it's relatively easy to see the strength of an ability like this because one of the primary jobs of a support player is to secure vision, and this ability can easily do just that. Now moving on to her ultimate, which is Enchanted's Crystal Arrow, another global ability. Ashe's ultimate fires a massive arrow that grants vision for everything it passes through, as well as colliding with the first enemy champion hit, which is the, ever so long 3.5 second stun and dealing damage. Ashe can really abuse her ultimate with this style to really set up fights where they shouldn't be allowed and begin engages around objectives, and which reduce cooldowns on her abilities overall with this build, make it extremely oppressive playstyle when successful. Moving on to runes and items real quick. As I've previously mentioned, support Ashe is only good with combat generally, which means you have to take the sorcery tree as your primary option. So with this, great options are things like Mana Flow Band, Transcendence, and Scorch to take full advantage of your early game poke and snowball that into the mid game. As a secondary page, you typically want Cheap Shot and Ultimate Hunter because your W procs Cheap Shot every single time, and your kit is very revolved around your ultimate, so both of these are going to be very, very useful. Ability Haste is also a must on this build because of the amount of utility that you bring when your abilities are available. For items, you typically start Spectral Sickle and Health Potions, and on your first recall want to start rushing your Imperial Mandate and Ionian Boots of Lucidity, and potentially get a tier. It won't take long to complete these, and then when you do, you'll have 40 ability haste from just these 2 items alone. Upgrading your tier to Man Immune, then your core build is complete, and you'll have at least 55 ability haste under your belt. From here, you typically want Chempunk Chainsword if the enemy has a lot of healing, or Axiom Arc to pad her ability haste stat and add on that item passive. Items like Umbral wave are also really helpful for vision control. For her last two items, support Ashe will want a watchful wardstone and an umbral glaive, or some sort of other defensive option if you're against heavy burst. In net, this build can cause Ashe's ultimate to have a flat cooldown of around 30 seconds, and if you get a takedown with it, can lower it even further. Considering that Ashe's ultimate is a tool that can get kills and big plays by itself, and it comes up as often as it does, it can be absolutely insane. Moving on to matchups, Ashe's best matchups are into champions that are meant to poke and trade, but simply don't have the range to compete with Ashe. So these are champions like other enchanters or some ADCs with lower range. You still need to be careful not to get caught because of how squishy you are as an ADC still, but that's still pretty much the same regardless of any support opponent. Ashe's weakness is probably similar to what she has as an ADC. She tends to struggle against engage or things with high sustain because her whole playstyle revolves around poke. So if there's champions that can negate the poke like Soraka or Senna, it's going to be very hard for you to really get much done. But however, into matchups where they don't have sustain and there's not many options for them to kind of stop you from poking forever, then it's going to be really easy for you to play those out. In terms of Marksman pairings, she's very punishing support in lane, so she's best paired with bot lane champions that can do the same. She has great utility, so she can set up her teammates and land harder skill shots, things like that. For example, Seraphine can follow up with a non-empowered beat drop to get a free root on the enemy, so we can actually have reverse roles here, so it's farming Seraphine and Ashe support. Other champions like mages that require a lot of setup, like Jhin or Ziggs or MF even, like these are all great champions for this as well. All these marksman champions and mages can really play aggressively and punish mistakes while also having the range to really capitalize on Ashe's poke from most places. Now quickly touching on each phase of the game. So in the early game, you'll be tempted to spam volley to pretty much annoy the heck out of your enemies, but you should really keep an eye on your mana. That's the big thing. The one downside to this early game is that you can really burn through your mana super easily if you're spamming volley. So the best way to really stop on top of this resource is to hold your volley for when mana flow band and combat runes are available, just to maximize its value. There are also alternative poking options like straight up autoing them or timing your bases around that in order to get your tier and then continue the onslaught. When it comes to the mid game, the best use of support Ashe is to start influencing other lanes. So whenever you recall, you should be looking to set up a play with your ultimate because it's far too useful and powerful to not really try and use. This can really result in getting plays, especially before dragon spawning, because you can get a pick to gain tempo, and then usually you'll be able to get that drag for free. In the later stages of the game, Ashe has more ability haste than you'll probably know what to do with, honestly. At this point, it's mostly about staying alive and just doing your job as a backliner so that you can use your abilities as soon as they come up. So you got things like Hawkshot that check on enemy locations super often, and you can use your ultimate to really just get a lot of control of the map. Overall, Ashe is an incredible champion in design and her supportive utility, surprisingly enough. Although she is over a decade in age and has withstood the test of time, her utility focused kit is going to be something that's going to be able to adapt to the current meta, even if it means that she's going to have to change positions and really flux to the support role, which I think is super interesting. As always, I hope this guide has helped you out, and I will see you in the next one. Stay fresh.